Holy freaking...
You're live?
What?
You're live?
And we're recording, right?
Yep.
Okay. We're just going to have to see what's going on here. So, this Vayikra, which is known as Leviticus, in verse 16, right? And it said, and if his slaying is a vow or is not like Vanna White, not a vowel, but a vow, or a free will offering, he may eat the slain in the day that he brought it, and he may eat the remainder. I tried to say remind and came out that. Remainder next day. So the first and the second day, you can eat it if it's a vow or a free will offering. Nothing's happening. It either doesn't move at all or it goes in giant leaps. All right, so moving on, starting today with 17. Very literal English would be, and the remainder from flesh the slain in day the third with fire and burn. So we got from the last verse that you can eat it on the first and the second day. Now it's saying that you can do it on the third day and then you have to burn it. Don't mean to give it away. Spoiler alert. Translation, get it? So we start off ve hanotar, which is and the remainder. Not the reminder, the remainder. That which is redundant, that which is left, the leftover. And that's literally what we call food that's left over from the previous day. We call it leftovers. So you can have leftovers on the second and now third day. So the remainder, mi besar or mibsar. I don't know if they say it that way in modern or not, but mi besar is how they would have said it way back in the day. And that's from flesh. So the remainder from the flesh, we would have to add the to it, though it's not necessary in Hebrew. And this is the meat, the part that you're eating, that part that remains, hazavach, of the slain, the thing that was offered. So let's say you offer a sheep, but you've got a big family and the sheep's going to be kind of skimpy to get across. So maybe you make an extra pot roast, or maybe you make some hot dogs to go with it. I don't know what you do, right? So you make some. Now that food is completely not under these laws. You understand? It's just the food that was slain for the purpose of this sacrifice. It's the only thing this thing includes. It's no other meat that may be you added to the food. This is bayom, in day, literally. And so it's going to have to tell us which day. Then the next word, ha-she-lishi. You hear the word for three there, right? So in the third day. And what do you do with it? Ba'esh, in fire or with fire. You can say it either way. That's a word that mimics the sound of a flame. The burning of whatever you happen to be burning. In this case, it's going to be the flesh. So that flesh, on that third day, at the end of that third day, has got to be burned. So then we have yisaref is our last word, which is to burn. So it's going to burn it in fire, right? So our translation then of 17, and the flesh of the slain, vow or free will offering. Can I throw that in there in parentheses or something? And the flesh of the slain on the day he offered and ate it will not remain among us till the morning of the third day. Well, that sounds like you can only eat it first and second day. That's not what I was reading it. Back up and see if maybe I wrote this wrong. I may have or may have not. The remainder from the flesh, the slain in the day, the third. I think there could be an argument here, because it's not really saying that you can't eat it on the third day. It says that it has to be burned today, which as long as you burn it before the sundown, I don't know why you can't eat that 3 days in a row. So let's go and see what the sages may have said something about it. We never know. All right, so compare this to Shemot 12:10, Exodus, which says, "And you shall let none of it remain to the morning, and that which remains of it in the morning you shall burn with fire." So what we have to remember here is he can eat it in the day he makes the sacrifice and the next day, but he must burn it before the morning of the third, is the way it seems on the one hand to say it that way, and then on the other hand, it seems to be saying that it has to be burned on the third day, and that's a 24-hour period of time. So I think there's some argument here that could be made for either way. I don't believe this is completely clear. But the sages didn't say anything that I found on it. So we'll move on to our next verse and see what happens there. So verse 18, a rather long one, very literal English here. "And if that eat he ate from flesh slain pieces offerings his in day the third, not he accepted that make come or to bring, with he not he reckon to he unclean he will be, and the soul that eat from us guilt her," speaking of the soul, that's the her, "you shall bear up." Okay. It don't really, it kind of seems crazy. That's hard to understand, right? But it's not really all that hard to follow. We start off with ve'im, and if. A whole, that's the word for uh, consume, to eat, fire consumes the land. Fire eats the land. If the fire is being like the Santa Ana winds every year in California, to bring it into popular culture, if you will, American culture, we know that pretty much every year there's a bunch of fires that go on that are fueled by the dryness of the area and the heavy winds that come through, and you get the Santa Ana winds that blow this stuff, fire breaks out, next thing you know, thousands of acres are being eaten up by the fire. All right. Then it says, Ye'achel, and so if he ate it, or she, it wouldn't really make any difference. Mi besar, that's that word we had a while ago, that's from flesh. If what you've eaten is from that flesh, not the other flesh that to it so there'd be enough meat to go around. Zevach, of that slain, right? That which was slain, however you want to put that. Shelamai. Now this is saying the peace offerings. So it sounds to me, and it's happened several times now, so maybe we should be starting to get the idea that all of these different, particularly the vow offering and the uh, free will offering, and then what were some of the other ones that we were looking at? I can't remember, but you'll get the point. Those are apparently under a category that's called peace offerings. And this is peace that comes to our minds and our hearts because of something that we've done, these offerings that we have brought to God. It's not making peace with God. We haven't committed some sin that we're trying to make right. We're trying to make it right with God. No, that would be a sin offering, right? So the peace offering is not the idea of appeasing God. We got to throw our kid in the volcano so that God won't be mad at us, or we have to slay our firstborn so that God won't stop the crops to grow. That stuff's nonsense. It's from the false ideologies, the Greek mythologies, and the stuff that, obviously was there before the Greeks. But Moab, they were big on that kind of thing there. This was what is the word I'm looking for? Pagan. These are pagan ideas that you have to do these things to make God, their God, not mad at the people anymore. That's not what a peace offering is in the Hebrew Bible, in the Hebrew world. The peace is something that we gain, not God. All right, so Bayom, that's in the day, Ha Shelishi, in the third day. Then it says lo, which is a negative article, not Ye Razech. No, I'm trying to say the wrong word again. Ye Razeh. That's, it won't be accepted. In other words, it's God's going to say, nope, you didn't do that right. So there are things that make sacrifices unacceptable to God. We know this. It's all throughout the Bible. From the very beginning, you had two brothers. One brought the leftover stuff and just tossed it at God and said, there you go, showing God what he really thought and how he really felt, right? And then the other brother brought God something that didn't cost as much, but it was the best he had to offer, right? And God accepted. Or things, when you're giving God less than your best, I wouldn't say that it's always going to not be accepted from God, as far as if you bring a gift, for instance, to a friend or a neighbor or your rabbi or whatever, and you're just, because this, I have this friend, he's passed on, but every time he wanted to buy something new, like say he wanted a new lawnmower, he would give his lawnmower to me, his old one, which was always a good one. Whatever he gave me was always in mint condition. It was always well cared for, well taken care of. It was never non-working junk. I mean, I had a friend that did me that way. He gave me a bunch of junk and then got mad at me when I got rid of it because it was costing me money to store it. But anyway, that's another story. But this friend of mine, he would, he wanted a new weed whacker. So he gave me his old weed whacker, which was a walk behind kind. He bought a new one. He wanted a new lawnmower, so he gave me his old lawnmower. Well, that's not the same thing. You know what I'm saying? He did not. It was not required of him by God to go out and buy me the new lawnmower and him keep the old junky one, right? Because he didn't have to give me the very best. Are you following what I'm saying? It's not the same thing. But when you're giving a sacrifice, a literal sacrifice to God, it has to be given properly and it has to be the right thing. So, and in this case, what makes it wrong is that you've eaten it after that third day. You've eaten it when you shouldn't have. You didn't burn the rest, the leftover. You didn't burn it on the fire and get rid of it like you should have. So now all that effort and all that expense, because you're chopping up a lamb, buddy, that's expensive. It's always been expensive. Uh, so that's going to cost you, Tinkerbell. Just saying, and that's not going to be accepted by God because he told you don't do that. And if he told you don't do it, there might be a reason, as like after the third day, it maybe could bring illness or sickness of some kind, some kind of, I don't know, botulism or something could grow in it. Or, I mean, there could be a reason like that behind it. And but on the other hand, this is the Almighty God who created everything, and whatever he sees as right is right. It doesn't make any difference how we look at it. If we look at it and we're saying it's wrong, we're looking at it backwards because it isn't wrong. God is always right. God is never wrong. So whether there's a reason or not makes no difference. And we should be okay with that. We really should be okay with that. All right. Anywho, what was our next? So it won't be accepted. And this is Hama Keriv. That was brought, that which was brought. Oto, with it. Lo means not. Yehashev, he reckoned. So it hasn't been reconciled or written in the ledger, this good thing that should have been part of your eternally living record. It's going to go down as one of the bad things, if you will. It says lo, which is sound alike. This means to it. Pigul, unclean. Yeah, it will be. So here's the thing. If you eat after that third day of that meal and you didn't burn it off, it has made you unclean. Unclean. Then it says, vehanefesh, and the soul. Why would they say that? Well, instead of saying he or she, saying that person, and then there'd be an argument. Well, was that person a man or a woman? You say that soul, and then that covers everything. Man, woman, child, any of the 40,000 genders that we have now in the world because of all the insanity going on. All of that's covered by nefesh, that soul. How many souls were on board the ship? Well, you count the number of heads. How many souls were on board the aircraft? How many human beings were on that aircraft? And yes, children are counted. All right. Then it says, Mimanu, Amas, Abona, the guilt of it. That soul is from that act, has now become guilty. He is unclean, or she, and guilty at the same time. So then it says tisa, which is that word to lift up, to carry away, used in a lot of different ways. So here we go. Let's look at what it all says when you bring it together. And if he actually ate, that's an idiom, because what it said was that he ate. Remember that, how that sounded? Well, if he actually ate from the flesh that was sacrificed from his peace offerings in the third day, that which was brought is not accepted. He is not reconciled by it. It is unclean, and the soul that ate from it will bear the guilt of it. I should have said he is unclean. It or he, it can be either way. So you could say the sacrifice was unclean, or you can say the person was unclean. It doesn't make any difference, because if you're the person making an unclean sacrifice, that makes you unclean, right? So there is no difference here. That's why there was no need for explanation. Okay, so we have not changed gears here. Sorry. Mouse is no longer doing anything. Okay, there it goes. We've not changed gears. The previous verse reminds us not to eat the vow and free will offerings on the third day, and here we are being reminded not to eat the peace offerings on the third day. That's a stupid thing to say. That doesn't make any sense. I was drunk that day. I should lay off the coffee. But anyway, it's not something separate from the previous verses. It's just a summation. Let me say it that way. I think it makes more sense. Waiting on my mouse to do something. I don't know what's going on. Huh? No, it's not helping. Keep telling me to do stuff that I've already done. Dadgummit. Slow down. Almost there. Yeah. Of the words not accepted. Sorry, I don't know what's going on here. We bought new mouses. I like that better than mice. We've done everything we can. We got brand new computer, and I don't know. Of the words not accepted. Onkelos by Drauzina Wagner wrote, The meaning of Scripture's pigul here in 19:7 is also found, of course, in Isaiah 65:4 and Ezekiel 4:14. And of course, they say it's obscure, because if it's showing up 1 to 3 times, that's pretty obscure. Various definitions have been suggested. Neophiti, I think is how that's pronounced, Pseudo-Jonathan, and the fragmented Targum have Pesul, defective. They're thinking that means defective. Even Yanach, Saadia, and the Samaritan Targums chose putrid. Instead of defective, now it's putrid. The meat must be putrid, right? Oh, I went too far. Now I don't even know where I am. Okay. Oh, I see. So Janik said it was putrid. Saadia said it was disgusting. The Samaritan Targum said it meant revoked. And Sifrei said nothing about it. They, I guess, skipped right over it. Our Targumist is evasive, even as he is with most of Leviticus's technical terms. He paraphrases with merahak, which literally means distant, because the sacrifice is rejected. However, he also uses this evasive term in the place of Scripture's orla, nida, and toeva without defining these matters. They did this because they didn't have any clue what the Hebrew meant. That's what's going down. These are people, the older stuff, these people you'd think would have known. They're from very close to the same time period of this, of it. They're from a time period when they should have known what these words meant. What tells me that these guys were not legal scholars, biblical legal scholars. Otherwise, they, of all people, should have known. Now, the ones that come from the Dark Ages, well, that's a whole different ball game. They didn't even speak Hebrew at all. So if we bring a pieces offering, whether it's vow or free will or whatever, even if we did so not because of sin, and then eat of that offering on or after the third day, we are now guilty of Torah rebellion. You follow what's going on here? Now, the only way you're going to make this right is you're going to have to depend on a sin offering and not eating when you shouldn't the next time, because you just wind up guilty again. All right. So moving on to verse 19. And the flesh that unclean in all unclean, not he ate with fire and burn, and the flesh all pure he devour flesh. That was wild. All right, so we start off with vehabasar. Well, so that's and the flesh. That's the part that's being cooked so that it can be eaten, right? The flesh, asher yiga, that is unclean. Flesh that is unclean, bechol tame, in all uncleanness. There's a lot of ways that flesh can become unclean, right? If an animal has ripped apart another animal and you picked it up and brought it for a sacrifice, that's unclean, folks. If you're unclean from eating the flesh afterwards, well, that flesh is unclean. There's a lot of ways for it to be unclean. It's just talking in general terms here, is best I can tell. Then it says, lo, which is not, ya'achel, he shall not eat it, or they shall not, or whoever. It doesn't actually say that part. And then it says, ba'esh, so that's with fire or in fire, yisaref, he will burn it. It will be burnt in fire. If that meat is unclean, you've got to burn it up. You cannot go donate it to the orphanage. A lot of people do things like that. They'll take a meat that is unclean, and to make it okay, they donate it to the orphanage. No, that's bad stuff. Anyway, veha basar, and the flesh, kol tahor, that is pure. That's the opposite of being unclean. This is pure. It's set aside for God, would make it pure if it's the right kind. I mean, it's not a pig, it's a sheep. It has no blemishes, it doesn't have any gouges in it, that sort of thing. So it's pure flesh. Yochal, he devour. So you can eat the flesh that is pure, and you cannot eat the flesh that is impure. If you ever wonder where that idea came from, there you have it. So basar, that's the flesh. I kind of jumped ahead of that, didn't I? So here's a translation. And the flesh that is made unclean in anything, and then I put in parentheses, listed in the Torah that makes it, and then I put the closing bracket, and I go on, unclean, he shall not eat. It will be burnt with fire, and the flesh, all that is pure, he will eat, that flesh. You kind of have to see my translation to really get that one right. Can you see those words over there, Donna? Go over onto the computer to the other program, like just make that one go small, the TV one. Make that one small. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on the control panel.
Over on the far right, there's one that says picture in picture. Click on that. And then there's like a triangle go button above it to the right.
Run.
Yeah.
That doesn't do anything.
Well, it should have. Hold on, guys. I want you to see this. You got it? Okay. Well, I gave up a little too soon. That's the easy part. All right, so can you see the translation? All of it? Well, what if you see it? They should, right? All right, so you see what I've done. I said, and the flesh that is made unclean, and I underlined anything, and then you got the little bracket listed in the Torah that makes it, close the bracket, unclean, he shall not eat, and then I have to add the word it, or you're not going to know what it says. It will be burnt with fire, and the flesh, all that is pure, he will eat, and then I have to add the word that, flesh, right? Okay. Just press number 1 on our box over here.
Number 1. It's already on number 1. Oh, okay.
Check it out. We're going high tech. Grandma and Grandpa's getting with it now. All right. The words in anything unclean tells us that the only things that are unclean to the children of God are those things listed in the Torah. Did you hear me? The words in anything unclean tells us that the only things that are unclean to the children of God are those things listed in the Torah. Now, I may have never mentioned this before, and I probably should because it's very important. There is a verse in the New Testament letters, and all the Jews are going, what? No, come on, listen up. Every Jew needs to learn this one verse from the Christian Bible. And every Christian needs to learn this one verse from the Christian Bible. And it's 1 John, you use a first finger, 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. Leave number 2 out. That just smells things up. 1 John chapter 3, 4. That might help you remember. I'm sorry. It says that all who commit sin are also in rebellion of the Torah. This is the Christian Bible. All who commit sin are also in rebellion of the Torah, because sin is Torah rebellion. That's the end of all that one verse explains what sin is and what sin is not. It's all covered in that single sentence. And it is a sentence that every Jew needs to learn and every Christian needs to learn. You need to memorize it. So if you're a Jew and some Christians over here, we're not all caught up with legalism and bondage because we don't live by the law. We live by grace. See why you might need to know that verse, Jew? Now, on the other hand, if you're a Jew saying, you cannot even believe in God and be a Jew, you cannot live by God's law and be a Jew, 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. All who commit sin are also in rebellion of the Torah, because sin is Torah, rebellion. You're better off not being a Jew than you are being a Jew living in sin. I'm just saying. I must move on. I just thought, do I even have time? I do. All right. If we can get this mouse to wakey mouse. I do not know what's going on. My dog's looking at me weird. What is that about? Will you reach over there and see if just put your finger on the mouse pad and move that around a little bit? Okay. I'm going to go pick that up and bring that over here. Sorry, guys. Professional, but I'm not missing another week without the law. I can't hardly live without the law. I don't know about you guys, but I got to have me some law. Whoops. I'm scaring the stuffing out of my unclean animal here. All right. Is that on the... Okay. This way I can... Now, don't do that. All right. Before we get into this other thing, Kyle. Yeah, Kyle and Deluge. Kale, what's his name? I went a little bit past it. I didn't mean to do that. Let me back up a little bit here. Kyle and Deluge, of verse 20, which I guess is where we're going next, they said, on the other hand, the soul which eats flesh of the pieces offerings and his uncleanness is upon him. For they love that word. Uncleanness is upon him. The suffix is to be understood as referring to nephesh, construed as a masculine. See chapter 2, verse 1, shall be cut off. I don't know. You just almost have to be drunk to, as they're saying. Sorry, I'm having trouble finding my mouse. It's so tiny on this thing. Well, stop that now. That's just rude. All right. Then they go on to say this was to be done whether the uncleanness arose from contact with an unclean object, anything unclean. There's another way meat could become unclean if you were on your way to the temple with this sheep and it stumbled over a dead rat or something. Now it's unclean. If, say, you stumbled over, or somebody ran up to you and fell in your arms covered in blood. Now you're unclean, and touching that animal makes it unclean. There's all kinds of ways. Just saying. All right. This was done, blah, 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 or from the uncleanness of man, or from the unclean beast, or from, so they're just saying there's all kinds of different ways that the meat can become unclean and the man can become unclean and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, they're saying some weird stuff here I don't want to get into today. I was thinking I would when I wrote this stuff down, but boring. Oh, I can be looking up there. What am I doing? I don't even know why I bother with these guys. All right, let's move on to 20. I've wasted enough time. It says, and the soul that shall eat flesh sacrifice the pieces offerings that to Yahweh, in other words, that are brought to Yahweh, and uncleanness he upon him, and shall be cut off her, the soul, the she, remember the she means these, from peoples her. I don't know, we haven't had the she in a long time, but it means these, These. Okay, so we start on vehanefesh, and the soul. That's the breath of life, a sweet odor, which is exhaled. The soul, the anima by which the body lives, a token of which life is drawing breath, hence life, vital principle. It's a part of you that goes on after you die. That's a lot easier way to look at it, I think. This is asher tochal, that shall eat. It's a little slower than rolling a ball, but it's getting me there, guys. Basar, the flesh, that shall eat the soul, that shall eat the flesh. Mizevach, that's from the slain. Remember, that's not mizbeach, but mizevach, that's from the slain. The other one would be from the altar. They sound a lot like, but they are different words. Ha shelamim. You remember that word? The pieces offering. Shelamim. That's, you hear shalom in that, right? I hope you do. Asher la Yahweh. That's to our God, right? Then it says ve tum ato, and uncleanness, it, or uncleanness, his uncleanness, its uncleanness. Not clear yet. Alive is upon him, so we know it's his. Then what do we have? Venichreta, and shall be cut off her. To cut off a part of a garment. Snip, snip, right? To cut off. To kill, to destroy. Ha nefesh, the soul. So that person. Ha heave, and that's the she, literally. And that means these, These. It's just the way that Hebrews say it in Hebrew times. I don't know if they still do this. Meha, or meha, rather, from peoples her. So it's telling you that that soul who did this is going to be cut off from the people. How does that work? Well, the people all happen to know whether it just, you're a Jew, so you know. And you look at that other Jew and you say, unclean. No. A guy taught that one time, was trying to teach about when somebody had leprosy, they'd walk around and the person who had leprosy would, or no, the people who did not have leprosy would see some leper and say, unclean, unclean. No, no, that is not what they did. If you were unclean and for some reason you were in town, which you should not have been, you're supposed to be out of town if you have that disease, because it is highly contagious. You're supposed to quarantine. And in this case, you got to quarantine outside the town, because this stuff it can get in the stones around your house. It can get on your pots and your pans and your furniture and any kind of clothing and in your car. This stuff gets around. So you got to go out of town. But if for whatever reason, let's say you're out of town and some group of people are taking a shortcut and don't realize that they've come that close to a leper colony, or you're even just a leper staying out in a hotel, in a shack somewhere, that leper has got to let them know that this is a dangerous place to be. And so he pulls off his mask and screams in their face. No. But before they get too close, he does have to say unclean, unclean, right? He's got to let them know that he's unclean. But the point here is that the person who is unclean does the quarantine. The person who's unclean in this case has to separate themselves. There are no unclean police. There never have been, and there should never be. There are not people who are out there supposed to be making sure that if somebody's unclean, they're cut off. Because if they're doing that, the person could never be cut off. This is something that you're supposed to do, and something that you and God both know, because God knows everything. So you're not going to hide this from God. And yes, you will pay. Now, whether you pay now or in the afterlife, I don't know. And what the price is, I don't know. But you will pay, because God is a just and upright God. So I'm just saying that that soul will cut themselves off, and it was not necessary for God to say that, because this was the way that things worked in the Hebrew world all throughout their history. I mean, you got to get into modern times before it's something different. Okay, let's see. That was our last word. So our translation of verse 20. And the soul that shall eat flesh from the slaying of pieces offerings, which are for Yahweh, and his impurity is on him. So if you're unclean when you do that, you should not be unclean when you do this. But if you were unclean at that time, it's on you. That soul, I should say it this way, shall cut himself off from these peoples. Then I have a note saying exactly what I just said to you already, so we'll just skip that. All right. Verse 21 is strange, but and soul for you shall touch in all unclean, in uncleanness mankind, or with livestock unclean, or in all unclean, and eat from flesh sacrifice the pieces offerings that to Yahweh, and shall be cut off her, the soul, she or these, from people's her. So kind of sounds like the same thing, and it is. But this is a more detailed. This is so that you can't come along later on and say, well, I didn't know. And you don't have to ask 1,000 questions, because you're going to get more detail here. So venefesh and soul, ki tiga, for you shall touch. So if you touch, I'm sure it's going to say something about unclean. Bechol tameh, in anything unclean, no matter what makes it unclean or how it comes clean. If you've been touched by that, if you've touched something unclean, betumat, in uncleanness, Adam, of mankind. So it don't make any difference. Anything that makes mankind unclean. What makes mankind unclean? Well, let's say you got an oozing sore, and you've touched some person with an oozing sore. That's one of the things among men that makes them unclean according to the Torah. And if you've touched that, you cannot make this sacrifice. This wrong. In fact, I'm positive I'm saying this wrong. Let me say it a different way. If you're the one with the oozing sore, you cannot make that sacrifice. Somebody else having an oozing sore does not make you unclean. So let's say that differently, because that really is leading to a wrong conclusion, isn't it? And this is or be vehema. That's the cattle, the beast of the field, whatever, anything that's there. So if you've eaten of an unclean animal, or you've handled a dead one, those are types of things that will make you unclean from the animal world. Tameh will make you unclean. Or, it's the Hebrew word is o. You just say o, we say or, and they say o. Bechol, in all sheketz, in anything that's unclean. Anything that makes you unclean among the laws of man, anything that makes you unclean among the laws of animal, and anything that makes you unclean anywhere in any way, shape, or form. You see what's happening here? If you're unclean, don't do this. All right. And then the tameh, the next word being unclean. This is ve'achal, and eat. It's like to eat food, to devour food, that sort of thing. Mi basar, the flesh. Don't eat the flesh. Zevach, of the sacrifice. Ha shelamim, of the pieces sacrifice. Which that hits me something there. It's not telling you that you can't make the sacrifice. It's telling you that you can't eat the flesh of that sacrifice if you've been made unclean in any way that the Torah pronounces someone to be unclean. So you can't do that. Asher la Yahweh. So that which is sacrificed to our God. This is ve'nik reta, and shall cut off her, literally. So that person's going to cut themselves off. Ha nefesh, that soul shall cut themselves off. Ha heave, that's these. Mia meha, from peoples her, from her people. The soul. The soul is said in feminine, whether it's man or woman, doesn't make any difference. All right, so our translation. And because a soul will be touched with all uncleanness among the uncleanness of mankind, or with unclean livestock, or with anything unclean, and eat from the flesh of the slaying of the peace offerings that are for Yahweh, that soul, I'm going to have to add those little words, that soul shall cut itself off from these, his people. And not his as in God's, but the person's people. So as I said in the previous verse, the person who is unclean by anything that makes man unclean and then eats from the offerings must separate himself or herself from the people until he or she makes a sin sacrifice. That's what it's really going to boil down to. This would have been a very expensive mistake. Very. So now we are going to change gears, because it says very literally in English, and he spoke Yahweh to Moshe to saying. You know what that is, right? That's one of those things that Kasuto taught us well. It's a change of topic. All I could think of was subject, so I had to talk funny there for a minute. So it says, and Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying. That means we're changing the topic. So we have to let go of where we were and move on to where we're going. So 723 came out 70 somehow. It says, speak to children Yisrael to say, all fat ox and sheep, goat, not shall eat they. Well, if they're not supposed to eat, how'd they get fat? I'm just saying. So it starts off, daber, speak, setting in a row, ranging in order, leading, guiding words. So be very specific about how you say this and make sure they understand. The idea here in saying dabar is to make sure that they understand what you're trying to say. So you may have to emphasize things to them. This is El, which is to, like me to you. B'nai, say to the children. B'nai means children. It's often translated sons because somebody only had sons or something like that. But it's children because it covers male and female. Say to the children, Yisrael. Say to the children of Israel. So this isn't to the children of America. It's not to the children of the First Baptist Church. It's to the children of Yisrael. Then it says lemor, to say. Kind of the same thing as the last verse, right? Kol, which is all or everything, is totality. Chelev, that's the fat. All the fat. Shor, which is the Hebrew word for ox, so called from its strength and boldness. A bull, it can be a bull. Then it doesn't really matter. Then it says vechesev, and sheep. The fat from the ox and the fat from the sheep. It's not saying the fat ox and the sheep. The S. So you have ox, sheep, and goat, all the fat. Lo, that's not. Tohelu, you will not eat their fat. You don't get fat from any of these things. So we're not talking about what's just been said here. We've switched gears. We were talking about the sacrifices, and it did say early on in these sacrifices that you couldn't eat the fat of the sacrifice. But here we've switched gears because and he said to Moses, right? So we've switched gears, and now it's saying that there is no fat from the ox, the sheep, the goat. Was there one other one? I can only remember three. That you're not allowed to eat any of it. So it's speak to the children of Yisrael, saying, the fat of the ox, the fat of the sheep, and the fat of the goat, they shall not eat. Must not be good for you. Just saying. Now, are we really moving on? Was that 23? Where were we?
I don't know, I can't see it.
Oh, darn. Oh, I got your monitor. Anyway, Kyle and Deluch said of verse 24, the fat, that which was left, they said, of cattle that had fallen, that bala is their Hebrew word that they're referring to, or been torn to pieces, vis-a-vis, by beast of prey, was not to be eaten, because it was unclean and defiled the eater. So now they're changing God's rules, or God just simply said, you can't have the fat off of any of these animals. They're saying, well, you can't have this fat off of any unclean animal, because what have they not done? They haven't changed gears. They're taking this verse and tying it to the previous verses about the sacrifice. So they're absolutely wrong because they're not recognizing this basic grammar rule for Hebrew. So it is very incorrect, and you're going to find this from most of the commentators. It doesn't matter if it's Rashi or Maimonides or whoever. Most of them miss this. Don't know why they should. Well, we do know why, because they didn't speak the language. So it helps if you understand the language and know some of the rules. I'm just saying. I'm not going to say anything else that they said because they just went on and on and on, and their basis was wrong and wrong and wronger. And wrongest. Oh my gosh, I wrote a bunch of stuff in there. Yeah, eventually they say the idea here is that since the restriction on eating the fat is not repeated at Sinai, this must mean that the ordinance was lifted and fat could now be eaten because, God changes all the time. So, no, you can't eat fat. Give it up. Quit trying to make God something he's not. Let's pop in 24. I think we can do one more. I'm really running out of time here. And fat carcass and fat torn he do to all workmanship, and eat not you shall eat he. And this, I don't know, maybe this is where Kyle and Deluch mixed this thing up. But anyway, it's vechelev and fat. Nebelah, there's your word that they're talking about. The carcass, a corpse. Vechelev, and the fat terepa that was torn. Ye'aseh, that's from asa, to lift up, to labor, to work, to manufacture, blah, blah, blah. So we say he do, he does, he did. That's a very long word, isn't it? To all, which is melacha, all workmanship. That's weird. To everything that's done, we could say it that way. Ve'achol, and eat. Yeah, it's good that we get through this. Let me get down to the bottom here. Lo, which is the not, the negative. No, toch luhu, you will not eat it. You can hear that noise, huh? I don't know how else to do it, so because I don't have little arrow thingies. All right, so the translation, and the fat from a carcass, and the fat which was torn, he may use in any work, but eat you shall not eat it. See, this is something completely different. They're trying to together and make it something that it's not because they don't recognize the change, right? But what it's really saying here is the fat can be used to stop a squeaky hinge on your door from making noise, right? I mean, think about it. What do you do? WD-40 or something like that. It'll stop a squeaky hinge. You need fat for burning so you can have light. That fat can be used. It's saying the things that you do for working and that sort of thing, you are allowed to use that fat. What you're not allowed to do is eat it. That's all that's happening here. So we are completely disconnected from the sacrifice idea. And this is just every day, anytime, anywhere. You don't eat the fat, but that doesn't mean you can't use it. You are absolutely allowed to use that fat for things that you do to do your work. Maybe you need to rub that fat, for instance, and this, I don't know that I'd consider it work, but it is for somebody, right? But back in the day, shields used to be made, they were covered over with leather, right? And then they would take fat and rub that on that leather and make them it would definitely do that. But the idea was, you think, well, if I'm rubbing fat, which is burnable because we use it for light, right? You think if you rub that fat on there, when people shot arrows with fire flaming out of them, that would catch your dilly whacker on fire, shield. But it didn't. It actually had the opposite effect. It helped put that fire out. I don't know why, but it did, and it made your shield somehow, it worked better. I don't know. I don't remember the whole thing on the whole shield thing, but they used to rub fat on it. So that's something that would be allowable. Even if you found a dead animal on the side of the road, you could do that. But what would happen if you did? It's a dead animal. That makes you unclean. So now you got to go through purification. Well, that's okay if you're in battle, right? So if you're in battle, you go ahead and do what you need to do because you can purify later. Probably not pure at that point anyway if you're in a battle because you've been fighting and blood's all over you and whatnot. So it's okay for you to use fat for things that it's needed, but it is not okay at any time for anyone who calls himself a Jew to eat fat. And it's as far as I can go today. Shalom, shalom, y'all.